Hey, deserving listeners, time for me to react to your comments from my videos from last week. Let's get to it. But first, I want to give a shout out to my fellow Hapa YouTuber, Samurai Guitarist. Love his channel. Love Island. I decided to react to Love Island. Alicia says, quoting me, "The point of this show doesn't seem to be to just hook up." So that's what I was thinking. And then Alicia says, "Dr. Honda, what a precious little cinnamon bun." I don't know, the show, at least they say they want to actually meet someone to potentially marry. I mean, it doesn't seem like explicitly like we're going to get married like The Bachelor, but I don't know. Is that what they're there for, just hook up? Maria says, "This man, Dr. Honda, has 2 masters and a doctorate, y'all, and we're out here making him watch Love Island. Bless you, Dr. Honda." Yeah, well, just a little side note on that is, I'm not sure if I'm going to continue watching it because I don't know if I have much to offer this show and my reactions to it, because they don't really give us much to go off of. I find that shows like The Bachelor, where people, they're not in a relationship yet and they're just trying to come across as likable or lovable or something, there's just not a lot I can say. So I don't know if I'm going to react anymore, and I hope that's okay with people. Abandonable Snowman says, good old Abandonable Snowman, with the mama's boy thing, I was talking about how there's this weird thing about mama's boys. I'd be most concerned about the mom being an invasive person in our lives. For some people, that's fine, but I like a degree of separation there. Yeah, I mean, if that's your preference, that's fine. But I do find that there's a lot of prejudice against mothers-in-law and an assumption of invasiveness or something. And I certainly have worked with people in situations where that is the case, but often it's more of a gray zone and a preference or a cultural thing. And I understand how it might be a little inconvenient to deal with your partner's in-laws, and you should be able to be heard and assert what you want. But sometimes, you know, you have to deal with it or change your perspective. You know, I think a lot of people, maybe, I don't know, percentage-wise, would rather the in-laws didn't come over as often or weren't as involved as often or didn't have as many activities, you know, because, you know, you have your family and then you have your in-law family, and usually we prefer our own family, not always. It can be reversed, but and so I think that there's this natural conflict there, but if you actually cultivate those relationships and actually try to lean in a little bit more, I think it can be very enhancing to one's life to have that support or those other people in your life. Now, of course, like I said, there can be in-laws that are horrible and abusive. I'm not talking about that. Jessica says, "I don't get it. I love both of my parents more than anything. I'm 31. They are both the best people I've ever met. I thought that was a good thing." Yeah, Jessica, it is a good thing. Screw the haters. Johnny Depp Amber Heard trial number 62, in which I was reading your emails. Courtney and Ms. Violets and others said some very nice, supportive things. Thank you so much. Meow had something nice to say, but also some specifics here. "As someone healing from abandonment and attachment traumas, I find you, Dr. Honda, to be the safest, most helpful space on the internet for me. I have learned so much about my own dysfunction and my family's dysfunction, and have had so much growth specifically because of you, Dr. Honda. Please keep doing what you do." Well, great, Meow. I'm glad for you. That is one of the reasons why I do this. I hope you also have a therapist to further grow with. Teal Swan number 5 says, Bao says about Teal Swan number 5, "I much prefer seeing this video podcast format so we can see the facial expressions and hand movements. It adds so much." TK says, "First off, so excited to see your face, Berto, and so happy to see the community agree and be so encouraging. Second, and it's a minor point, I have concerns about the pool waterboard scene. Even with it being a group activity, it just terrifies me to think about." Yeah, so first off, about video podcasting, I have always wanted to do it, but it's so complicated. I won't bore you with the details. I want to bore you with the details because I'm a nerd kind of about it, and it is a part of my daily life. But the podcast is a technical nightmare. There are so many things that I have to deal with. And if you know someone that podcasts, they will be able to tell you. And so when you're adding a video element to it, it exponentially increases the complexity and the potential for technical problems. Also, it makes editing a lot harder. So there's just so many problems. You know, it's not just like flipping on a camera and talking like you're doing a TikTok video or something, you know. It's pretty complicated. Of course, there are TikTok videos that are pretty complicated too. But anyway, my point is that I want to and have always wanted to and might do it moving forward. The problems, though, is that when I'm on camera, I have to have good posture. Like when I'm podcasting with no camera, I'm slouching, I'm, and I because I'm a very fidgety, squirmy person. And so I can't do that when I'm on camera because I have to stay in the frame and make sure that I'm presentable, that I'm not like, so there's that. And I think that can interfere with the content because if I'm overthinking my posture or I'm not able to get fully comfortable, it, I think, interferes with the flow. I'm getting better though, and I'm able to do things now in 2022 that I wasn't able to do a couple years ago. So I don't know. We'll see how things go. I did get everything set up so that I could do video podcasts with the co-host. I had to get out a camera and lights and all that kind of stuff. So we'll see how that goes. And also another detail that it makes it more complicated is not only am I the co-host and the person who edits the videos and uploads them and all that kind of stuff, but I'm also the person that does all the tech. And so while the recording is going on, I have, especially when it's video, I have to keep track of the video, the audio, the compression, the lighting, the cameras, the sound that coming in from outside, the temperature of the room. Does the co-host have a glass of water? It's only me. And so when you watch another YouTube channel, they might have a whole team that does all those things, and the host just sits down and talks. So I also have to deal with all that stuff. It'd be nice if I just had like a producer that was sitting here with all the mixing. I won't bore you again with I'm already probably boring you, but I have compressors and preamps and mixers and lights and cameras. And I mean, just the power situation, I'm just in my home. So the amount of power that's plugged into that plug, I literally have, I don't know, no joke, like 35 things that are plugged into one outlet. And all those wires have to be organized, and like I have to go under this table and like tape things so that it stays out of the way so I don't kick it and unplug it on, there's just a lot of things. So when I can just kick back and only deal with some of those things while doing an audio podcast, it's nice for me. Anyway, so TK also talked about the waterboarding scene and the pool scene. Yeah. So a little bit about that is, there's so much I can say about this, but I'll try to keep it brief, is that it's a known phenomenon in psychology and in education to some extent that when you create a distressing, uncomfortable moment for someone, and then you take away the stimulus that is, or the conditions that cause distress in the individual will often have a dump of euphoric feelings into their, and neurotransmitters into their brain, and will feel euphoric. It's sort of like when you have water in your ear and suddenly it drains after a week or a day or something where you can't hear right. And all of a sudden, the heavens open up and you can suddenly hear. Well, you're returning to baseline, but you're euphoric about it because you've been so long below baseline. Also, when you have pain and discomfort like waterboarding, there's a euphoric effect from that, similar to non-suicidal self-injury or working out, this kind of thing. Ayahuasca, it's various different things that people will do to produce distress and then the euphoria that follows when the distress is taken away. That is a known phenomenon, and a lot of charismatic leaders will use these techniques as a way to be quote unquote therapeutic or to control. Because when you create that, you can stand there and say, I did that. You are now feeling euphoric. Because a lot of times it's not just euphoria. You feel at peace. You feel like you're truly in the moment. You're no longer thinking about the future or the past. You're just in the now. And as a charismatic leader, you can manipulate people by utilizing these techniques, these known techniques, to say, I did that to you. You feel euphoric because of me. not because we created a known condition that will create a euphoric feeling afterwards. And thus you should give me more power and money and loyalty and that kind of thing. Now, people that utilize these techniques aren't always harming others. They can say from the beginning, by the way, this is going to do this, and then afterwards you're going to feel a sense of euphoria, but it's not likely to last forever. Because another thing that I will even see in the field of psychotherapy is therapists will engineer these moments and will claim you're cured. Your trauma is no more. Because in the moment, you don't really feel the symptoms, right? You might be dealing with depression, anxiety, PTSD, other kinds of issues ongoing, but then you have that massive distress like waterboarding or other kinds of events like sweat lodges can produce this, hot yoga can sometimes be like this. I'm not saying for everyone it's like this way, but it can be. There's even some therapeutic techniques where they walk. It's similar to what Teal Swan does, where they walk people through traumas and dive deeper into the pain, and then they say, now emerge. And Landmark Forum, I believe, does some things like this where they'll bring people on stage and berate them, and then they will support them afterwards. It's almost similar to boot camp in the military, where you return to baseline after being verbally abused and denied sleep and all that kind of stuff in boot camp, or Hell Week and frats, this kind of thing, fraternities, hazing. You emerge back to baseline, but you feel thankful that you're returning to baseline because you're now being pulled away from distress. But if the charismatic leader, if the drill sergeant is the one causing the distress and then the one providing the relief, you can sometimes, as a participant, feel confused, like your abuser is actually the one that is saving you, when in fact the drill sergeant or the charismatic leader created the conditions that caused suffering in the first place. You know what I'm saying? So you have to be wary of that. So you just always have to be careful whenever you're doing things. Now, for some people, they really like that. They really want that feeling and will claim that it really does help them. But typically those kinds of effects don't last, right? There's nothing wrong with having those experiences, but to claim that somehow you're cured and then a week later all your symptoms return because the effects wear off and you're like, oh, I must not be doing it right, or I need to go back to the program. I need to get more of that feeling and not necessarily get the help that you deserve. Desi says, I'm glad you watched and gave your opinion on Teal Swan. I found she offered nothing new or innovative. I do believe she is dangerous and will become more dangerous. She is controlling, and her non-negotiables are cult-like. Yeah, I think a lot of people agree with you. Teal Swan number 6 with Berto. Cripley says, yes, do a couples retreat. We will fly to Seattle. And Zio Mata says, Dr. Honda, in no way are you close to a cult leader. Yeah, well, thanks for that. And regarding the couples retreat, I don't know. I would love to, but I don't know if I have the time. If anyone knows how to just put that together, I actually thought about doing that. Just getting someone, they figure out the venue, they sell the tickets, they figure out how to communicate with everyone, they set up the accommodations, they rent the hall or whatever, and then I just show up, then yeah, they take half the money or something. I would absolutely think about that. But the logistical nightmare of me doing it all myself, which wouldn't be rational. But anyway, so there's that side of it. But I do want to have a live event once the pandemic is actually over, because we're still in the pandemic and there's still a lot of people getting infected. In fact, I heard a stat that most people who got infected by SARS-CoV-2 have happened this year in 2022, and we're only halfway through the year. So there's fewer people dying from it, but still a lot of people dying from it because there's a lot of people getting infected, and we don't know the long-term effects of having it. Anyway, point is that we're still in the pandemic, and once it's really over, then, or safe enough, then I want to have a live event of some kind, whether it's a couples retreat or much more likely it'll just be a live event, like a live podcast or something. Because I love meeting people in person. In fact, last night, me and the pod wife were at the Seattle Art Fair, and one of the fans approached me and said, hey, Dr. Karana, I watch your channel. And so I was talking with her for a bit, and then her mom owns an art gallery or something. And she's like, yeah. And it's like, oh, let's go check it out. So we went with her and we were talking for a while, and at first I thought she was just she just kind of knew me from the internet. She's like, oh, I think you're from the internet. Like, because that'll happen sometimes. Like, aren't you that guy? But as time went on, she was like indicating she was a huge fan. and I was like, oh, okay. And, that's nice. And then she said something along the lines of, I'm glad you're nice, because it would have, because when you meet someone that you like on the internet, or someone from media like Mr. Rogers or something, and you meet them behind the scenes, sometimes you're worried, are they going to be an a-hole? Because sometimes you hear that these people are jerk faces behind the scenes. And so she was like, oh, I'm glad that you're nice behind the scenes, or something like that. And I was like, oh, yeah, I could see how people wouldn't know, right? Because this could be one big act, one big smoke. Certainly some people believe that, right? Someone in green says, you mentioned that you, like Teal, are sensitive to criticism. To me, as an observer, you come across as humble and considerate when dealing with critical comments, etc. It seems that you are always making an effort to truly and empathetically understand where the other person is coming from. Teal, on the other hand, comes across as arrogant and grandiose when dealing with criticism. The difference in approach is significant. Oh, okay, interesting. George and Anfisa, number 17. Marcia says, it was clear from the start that Anfisa was abusive to George, and it only got worse over time. It's not all editing. She did hit him, she keyed his car, etc. There's no context that would justify that. Yet she has an army of fans who love Queen Anfisa. How? How indeed. I think what this illuminates to me, and the trial also did this, was how ignorant we are as a society about IPV, intimate partner violence. And I didn't realize that. I thought that when we were watching the trial, but maybe even particularly with Anfisa, because it's so stark to me, because there's nothing that George is doing to justify Anfisa's abuse of him. I thought that there would be more identifying of the IPV, that you might have people that are like, oh, I'm a fan of Anfisa, but that's not okay. And certainly there's a camp of people like that. But there seems to be a fair amount of people who think that George deserves the abuse that he's getting. And that's abhorrent in a variety of ways, not only to George, but to all victims out there, that somehow that behavior is okay. And what message are you sending to perpetrators and victims that Anfisa's behavior is not only justified or okay, but you're celebrating it? No. That is not okay. You can like her, you can hate George, but you cannot identify the way the show is depicted. We don't know what's really happening, but what we're seeing on the show, that anger in her face when she strikes. I don't know where we're at, because I've watched ahead a little bit, so I don't know exactly where we are in the publishing of the episodes. So anyway, but the anger in her face, it's not like she's like, oh, it looks like she wants to take him out and might even be restraining herself from hitting him further. That's how it looks to me. And she's really trying to hit him. And if he didn't put his hands up, she would be absolutely striking him across the face in a significant manner. It's not okay. Now, does George feel victimized? Does he feel unsafe? I don't know. There's no interview around that. It's possible that he's like, it's not that big of a deal. But anyway. Off-Brand is fine, says, thank you for saying that Anfisa is abusive. I was watching this couple with a different streamer online, and people were calling her queen and saying she was justified and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, no, having been raised by domestic violence, this is not funny. People said he was getting what he deserved, and it's just clear some people have never seen or lived with domestic violence. I don't get how anyone being abused is funny. I don't get how people can excuse it. Yeah. Again, I don't think it's because people are reveling in some sadistic pleasure, although there probably are some people that are like that. I'm guessing it's out of ignorance of IPV, because one, they don't know that women can be abusive and men can be victimized. Two, they don't understand that you can like someone and still say that's abusive, what they're doing. Three, they might not have ever actually been victimized themselves or don't recognize their victimization. For example, the state of mind as a victim you go into where you're trying to please the abuser and you're trying to do whatever you can to make the abuse stop or to keep the abuser in a good mood, and how you push yourself aside and how scary it is, even though there's not any direct threat. An abuser knows what to do often to make you feel absolutely terrified and convinced that there's a good chance that something really terrible is going to happen, that they're going to perpetrate. But they actually don't even have to say it. They don't have to say, I'm going to kill you, for you to feel like they might kill you. They don't have to say, I might go to the police and lie that you assaulted me. I might go to the police and claim that you sexually assaulted me. They don't have to say that, but they will do a lot of things that will give you the impression, it's similar to when people will stalk people. You have an abuser will stalk you. They don't have to make a threat. All they have to do is park outside of your place of work and just have lunch. And just sitting there, especially when you know what they're capable of in other contexts, you know what that means. And they know you know what that means. They hope you think that this means they might get you. So, because when you've never been through that experience, you might be like, well, he's parking across the street, big deal. Well, if you've been through an abusive relationship, the onslaught of ongoing terror and terrorizing, you get it. The abuser doesn't have to say, I might kill your kids or I might kill your pets, for you to feel like if you push them too hard and you don't manage and you don't please them and you don't constantly make them okay and subdue yourself to them, if you think, well, if I don't do that, there's a chance they might actually commit those crimes and harm me in that way. So when you live it, you get it. And I think a lot of people either have never lived it, or they did, but they dissociate from it, or they don't remember it, or they've never had a chance to talk about it, that kind of thing. So I think we need to do more to help people to understand what's happening. And then I don't think anyone, if they really knew victimization and perpetration, I don't think those people would be looking at Anfisa as Queen Anfisa. Alicia says, it's so ironic how his misogyny, George's misogyny, makes him incapable of seeing her aggression. Even when she's furious and hitting him, he's smirking like silly women and their emotions. Maybe if he saw her as more of an equal, he'd expect more from her as a partner. Yeah, that's a good point, Alicia. Bilal and Shida, number 14. A different Alicia says, Bilal's checklist for a future wife. Never make a mess, never question what he says, must be willing to live in a shack, must be willing to listen to up to 10 lectures a day. Maybe he should look into marrying a mannequin. Yeah. Camilla says, I didn't like Bilal's behavior during the yoga. I found it disrespectful and disruptive. I'm sure if Shida behaved that way whilst he was trying to teach them something, there would be endless lectures and sulking, etc. from his side. Emily and Kobe, number 5. A different Alicia, but the Alicia from the beginning of this comment, Alicia McIntyre, says, I grew up in Kansas, about an hour and a half from where Emily lives, in Salina, right? It is an abstinence-only sex ed state, so I'm not surprised at their lack of care. I went to a good high school, but we still had a daycare attached to the school for the teen parents. Yeah, abstinence only. I mean, I am astounded at the ignorance and shooting yourself in the foot. As a community, as a PTA, as a school district, as a parent, as a politician, I would assume you would want your youth to have information, 1. 2, have lower rates of STIs, lower rates of unwanted pregnancies, particularly as a teen, lower rates of sexual assault, higher rates of sexual self-esteem. I would assume you would want those things. Abstinence-only education has been found over and over again. There are so many studies. It's pretty easy to study. All you got to do is look at different pockets around the United States, compare the results. In some school districts will actually change from abstinence only to rational science-based sex ed. And you can compare the outcomes, and the outcomes are clear. That a lot of bad effects happen when you teach abstinence only. And why? It's like, because for some people religiously, due to their religion, you cannot have sex not only outside of marriage, but you can't even have it for pleasure. Because abstinence only, okay, well, what if you're married to someone? You either have to abstain or have a child, or be at risk of getting pregnant, that's the only option. Because we come from Victorian Europe, England, as a culture, our roots are there, and they believed that all pleasure needed to be wiped out, that it was low class, it was anti-God, which was a massive misunderstanding of, I think, God and also just human nature. Like, pleasure is okay. Having a nice juicy orange, having some pleasure, having sex with someone that feels good and it's mutual and consensual, why not? So it's all based on that just ridiculous notion that's 150, 200 years old. And we're still living with it. And the fact that people, anyway, that's not how we are in my neck of the woods. Although there are some problems with sex ed in my neck of the woods. I've ran into it as a sex ed educator in high schools and junior highs. And it's, but we're nowhere near absence only. Like, believe me, anyway, yeah. Yeah. So what Alicia is saying is that Emily might be a product of that lack of education. But again, there's the internet. So it's like, Twirling Barbie says, this is pretty difficult for me to listen to. I have been wanting to get out of my parents' house for the last 10 years. Right, so I went on a long tangent about parents that would come to me asking for therapy to help with their kid becoming more independent, the adult child, 25, 35-year-old kid. So Trillion Barber says, this is pretty difficult for me to listen to. I've been wanting to get out of my parents' house for the last 10 years. I was counting the days until I was able to move out, but I just can't find a job that would pay me enough to move out because of the housing prices. Yeah, Twirling Barbie, maybe I wasn't clear or I didn't say, but I'm not talking about people like you. And to be clear, I'm also not talking about imposing some sort of value on people, on clients. That, from me, it was parents coming to me asking me for help. There is nothing wrong with an adult child living at home. If everyone's cool with it, there's literally, and I've talked about that before, there's nothing wrong with a 45-year-old child living with their parents and having never moved out. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong if their parents are their only friends. Nothing wrong with that. It's certainly unusual. It's pathologized by society. There's nothing morally wrong with that. Nothing at all. I want to be clear. Might there be something wrong with it? Yeah. Often what's wrong is that the adult child that's living at home, they want to be more independent. They want to find competence. They want to get a job. They want to have a career. They want to get out there. But there's a barrier, and so they don't for a variety of reasons, or they might even convince themselves that they actually don't want to get a job and they don't want to become independent because they gave up on that a long time ago because they think it's not possible. They're not capable of it or something like this. So when parents would come to me, there'd be two types of situations. One, well, maybe three. One was the parents felt pressure from society to kick their kid out because they felt like they were or pressure their kid to become independent. And so one of the things I would do with those parents, I'd be like, so do you really want your kid to go, or are you just giving in to the stigma that your kid is still living at home? Like, let's really sift through that. So if it was that, then we could just attack the stigma and then everyone could live happily ever after, or however they do in the future. The other situation was when the child had some kind of psychological barrier. Often it was fear, anxiety, social anxiety or something that was preventing them from feeling comfortable looking for a job or meeting people, having friends, and they would have bad experiences at interviews or even at a job that they got and would retreat back home. They're trying, but there's some issue, and so we would address that. For some of those kids, those 25-year-olds, 35-year-olds who had some issue like that, and there's a variety of issues that people might have, depression being another one. For some of them, they were willing to get help. So you go to your 25-year-old who has social anxiety, for example, and you're like, let's work on your social anxiety. Let's work on a plan. And the 25-year-old will be like, okay, well, what do we do? Well, I think you should go to therapy, and I want to be involved, or if you want me involved, I'd love to be involved. And let's start working on a plan so you can have the life that you want to have. It's that kind of attitude, right? So that was one group. So in those situations, you don't really have to kick a kid out or threaten because they can't, there's something in the way that they're willing to work on, okay? Another group, they have social anxiety or something like that. They're not willing to work on it and they refuse. They refuse to talk about it. In those situations, if as a parent, you're like, I don't feel good about this. I would work with them again. I would say, are you giving into the stigma? If not, they're like, okay, I just want to help my kid grow up and be independent. But they're refusing to go to therapy. They're refusing to talk about it. I would say, well, what do you want to do? Some of the time, the parents would come to the conclusion that in order to motivate their kid, they would have to start threatening to take things away from them. We're going to stop paying for this. We're going to eventually maybe even kick you out, and you're going to have to get your own job or live with a friend, or I don't know, something else, because we feel like we're enabling someone to deny themselves their needs being met by continuing to prop up your life that is not meeting your needs. And we're suffering too, because we have to pay for your bills, and we don't want to do that anymore because you're able to work. So, and if you're refusing to do anything to work on that, that would be another category of situation. Another category would be there was no seeming barrier that the adult child had to becoming more independent, but they were just refusing to do so. There's a variety of reasons why this could happen. I could talk about 50 of them off the top of my head, but I won't. But for those adult children, there's no social anxiety, there's no depression, there's no PTSD or something, no avoidant personality disorder. And they just are defiant at the age of 25. They're just like, screw you, you're going to pay my bills, and that kind of thing. So, and maybe they're just struggling with taking the leap or whatever. And so in those situations, then the parents might come to the conclusion that they want to actually start moving towards a more severe consequence, like kicking the kid out or threatening to, that kind of thing. So Twirling Barbie, what you're talking about is one of the earlier categories I said, because you actually are trying, you want to get out of your parents' house, you say. You're counting the days until you're able to move out. You're really looking forward to that, but you can't find a job that would pay you enough to move out because of the housing prices. So no parent would come to me in your situation, because it's clear, I'm guessing even to your parents, that it's not your fault. You're doing everything you can. So I guess I should have been more clear when I was talking about that. B says, how do you balance teaching your kids to be independent versus making them feel like you're neglecting them? I'm on the other side of the spectrum with my hyper-independence after going to a boarding school at the age of 12 years old. I'm grateful to my parents for giving me all that freedom to develop competence, but I guess sometimes I feel like I was pushed into the deep end of the pool and I'm left alone to fend for myself. Yeah, so there's a lot I can say about this too, but I'll talk about John Bowlby. He's the one who originated attachment theory. His early childhood was more exaggerated version of UB, in that the aristocracy among rich people in England, which is where he grew up in the early 20th century, he was raised by nannies, because it was considered back then, and the royal family did this as well, that rich parents didn't actually get their hands dirty by actually taking care of the kids. They might kiss them goodnight or something and have dinner with the kids, but all the actual parenting was done by other people from birth forward. So you had these nannies, and John Bowlby, as a child, became very attached to one of his nannies, because children need attachment. That nanny, I can't remember the details, was fired or moved on in life or something, got married, and he had this massive the one person, his parents were like way distant, but this nanny was so important to him. And the nanny just disappeared one day. It destroyed him, and he never forgot it. Then, at the age of 7 or 10 or something, he's sent to boarding school, which is another massive attachment disruption for him. He would go on to become a psychiatrist, psychologist, I can't remember which, and started to research early childhood development, started to making these connections with his own life and his own problems in his life, and developed attachment theory, and started to really push this idea in England, saying, no, do not send your kids to boarding school. In fact, I think he specifically said it was like really an abusive thing to send kids to boarding school, particularly early in life, even at 12. So I've treated many clients who, as an adult, have massive attachment disruption issues, such as being pathologically independent, because they were sent to boarding school. It's considered to be like this cool thing, right? It's like, we're rich enough that we're going to send you to boarding school, or we're going to teach you how to be competent in the world. And okay, it might work, but at what cost? It's too early. 12-year-olds still need their families. They still need those attachments. So, there's a reason why 18-year-olds are the ones that go to college, you know? They're often ready to do that developmentally and attachment-wise. 12-year-olds are not. Some might be, but I don't know. I'd have a hard time believing. In fact, if I did find a 12-year-old that could go to boarding school and have no noticeable effects, I would say they were already being neglected and the 12-year-old gave up a long time ago and is already fully avoidantly attached. So, no. In fact, I would go on the record and say that boarding schools are abusive. Flat out. It's not okay. Why? Going to camp, maybe? Or maybe if the boarding school was down the street and the kids could see the parents more frequently or something, but often they don't see the parents at all. In fact, it's worse than college because at least in college you have a car, you can go back home or you could call often these boarding schools, you don't have any contact with your parents. In fact, one of the kids, this was recent actually, I was a Seattle kid, was a rich Seattle kid, white kid, went to a boarding school, and he was telling me that he couldn't even he could only talk to his parents like for a little bit of time on Sunday night, and even then his parents didn't seem to be that interested in him. And he was a great kid, very competent, very hyper independent, but very anxious and very unsure of himself deep down, very much of a perfectionist, this kind of thing. Often these are the effects of emotional neglect and attachment disruption like this. So what you're saying, B, is I was very competent and kicked out of the house, because B hears me talking about helping kids to develop and be competent. I want to be clear. I'm not talking about this. There's a healthy middle ground, okay? And there's a wide variety of things in there. Like the guideline I would say to people is there are two. One is age appropriateness, and two is specific to the kids. So for example, some parents might want their kids to drive themselves at the age of 16 and say, okay, you're 16, get your license. You're going to drive yourself to soccer practice. You're going to drive yourself to hang out with your friends. You're going to drive yourself to school if that's what you want to do. You're going to drive yourself to the dentist's office. And the parents want to instill that competence in the kid. And you have to push the kid because the kid's like, I don't want to drive. I don't want to do that. I want you to drive me. I don't want to get a license, or whatever. And you have to kind of push the kid. Some kids are champing at the bit to do that kind of thing. But so there's that. And whereas other parents might say, well, I'm going to wait till they're 20 or something. So, and both of those are generally healthy. So there's a wide range of what one would consider to be age appropriate milestone pushing, if you will. So there's that. The other thing to think about, but there are things outside of that range, right? That we would be easily, like sending a kid, basically abandoning your child at age 12. That's what a boarding school is. You're abandoning your child at the age of 12. Not okay. So that's going too far, right? But at age of 22 or even 18, saying that's what my parents did to me. They said, 18, you're moving out. I think I talked about that in the video. I was like, I want to live at home because my mom does everything for me. Parents are like, nope, 18, you're out. And I remember being like, oh, I mean, it did kind of hurt, but I thought, okay, well, I guess I'll make this work. And it was good for me to do that. And I did have to figure stuff out. I figured out how to do my laundry. It took a while. I learned how to be independent and figure things out, clean after myself or not clean up after myself, that kind of thing. So it was, it was good for me. But if it happened when I was 12, that wouldn't be great. Would it have been unhealthy if my parents had not kicked me out at 18? No, I wouldn't have been unhealthy. I might be a different sort of a person, maybe a better person, I don't know, but there, so again, there's a range there. The other guideline is to gauge the child. So some 16-year-olds, like I said, are champing at the bit to get their license right away. You don't have to push them. They're like, please, I want to drive myself. I want to get a job. I want to start paying my bills, that kind of thing. So there's that kind of kid. There's another kid that will say, I don't want to, but they manage. They once you implement the consequences, they begrudgingly figure it out, and they're like, okay, this isn't so bad. There's another category of kid that you do that with, and they essentially just shut down, or they completely flip out with anxiety or something. And even though everyone else in the neighborhood is doing that to their 16-year-old kids, your kid is different for some reason, and you don't just impose this, pressure to have this milestone regardless of what's happening. So you have to read the room. And if the kid is having an overreaction or they're shutting down, you want to adjust and say, okay, well, let's go a little slower, talk with the kid. How does it feel? And I don't know, I'm lying awake and I just worrying that I'm going to drive myself, or I feel like you're abandoning me. Like, I don't know. And they're not just manipulating, they feel legit. Okay, let's slow down. We've got some flexibility here. But the idea is you don't give up. You don't say, okay, I'm never pressuring him to do that again. You got to get there eventually. And it doesn't mean you pressure only. It means you try to help them with why they're struggling with it. Because, of course, you went through that yourself. We all did. All those milestones we went through and struggled with those anxieties and that lack of competence and the uncertainty. But we learned something, and we not only learned how to deal with that in a practical way, but we learned we could deal with those kinds of things, which is very important. If you want your kid to be happy, you have to give them opportunities where you're not there to save them, within reason, right? So to send your kid to boarding school at 12, no, that's way too far on this side of the spectrum, right? Videos of mine, Dr. Honda uses 3-in-1 shampoo. Yeah, I do, 3-in-1. Dr. Honda uses 3-in-1 shampoo, which is conditioner, body wash, and shampoo. Body wash, is that what the 3 is? I was like, it's shampoo and conditioner. What's the third thing? Body wash. Okay, I'll have to look at it. It probably is what it is. And his hair looks great, even though he uses 3-in-1. Does my hair? I don't know. So I take that giant thing of 3-in-1 shampoo. I think it's Suave brand. I think it's literally like $4 or something. And it's some sort of blue goo that comes out. Lather my hair up. And then I just use all those suds to just wash the rest of my body. And I'm in and out of the shower in 30 seconds. Emily and Colby, number 6. Ms. Violets says, Dr. Honda, what type of parenting and family system would contribute to someone like Emily who consistently underfunctions? I've been watching other episodes of them, and it seems like no one ever holds Emily responsible for her BS. They all make excuses and say, oh, that's Emily. Yeah, it's a great question, Ms. Violets. I'm glad you're asking. Gave me a chance to actually think about this. So what are the different parenting styles or family systems that produce someone like Emily and maybe more in further down that spectrum as Emily? Meaning that they're childish, underfunctioning, immature, lack of responsibility, somewhat lack of empathy. Because when I see Emily, I'm like, you're imposing on your the way I was raised. She is imposing on her parents. You don't have to feel this. This isn't what everyone needs to feel. But if I were in Emily's shoes, I would feel mortified. I think it's also kind of a Japanese thing. Also, my white side is from Kansas, and we're farmers, and I also feel like there's a lot of somewhat pathological independence from that kind of thing. And so I would feel very guilty and ashamed of myself for putting my parents out, especially as an adult when I'm capable of not only fending for myself, but also helping my parents out with their bills. You know what I mean? So I'm not going to judge, but what kind of family system, what kind of parenting? Well, here's a list. One is overprotective parenting, right? That's pretty obvious. So when a parent is overprotective. Anxious parenting is related to that, right? Parents who are very anxious. So if you were at that decision point of, do I pressure my kid to get a license and get a car, or do I not? If you have a lot of anxiety as a parent and it will manifest in the safety of your child, you will err on the side of not pressuring the kid, and you might not ever pressure the kid. And the thing is this has a cascade effect where, because you didn't pressure them to do that milestone, the child never developed the competence and confidence to succeed at that milestone. And then every other milestone after that, they even have more anxiety about. So, like, for instance, just thinking about being able to move out and get a job and live on your own, if the job market is conducive to that. There's so many elements of competence and confidence that one needs to have in order to deal with the anxiety and the uncertainty of that. There's so many elements that you have to feel like, okay, I know how to do this. This is a stretch, getting a job, paying my own bills, living on my own. That's a stretch, but I have all these other milestones that I've crossed that I can feel like, well, this is just another step forward. It's kind of a big step, but it's a step forward. Whereas if you have done none of those past milestones and never been pressured or never been helped to deal with whatever you're dealing with, then that milestone of moving out and getting a job, it's like expecting yourself to be able to take one step and cover the ground of a whole mile or kilometer or something, right? Every step should be possible. It's a step, but it's possible. So the kinds of milestones that you want to have accomplished prior to 22 or whatever, when your kid is expected to move out, are the ability to communicate with people like landlords or getting a job or coworkers. And there's a lot of milestones there, right? The milestone of being able to fill out a form and do it yourself and keep track of all those things. The milestone of keeping a calendar, the milestone of keeping a checking account, the milestone of budgeting yourself, the milestone of, oh crap, I spent too much money. How do I get, there's so many, and every one of those milestones I just mentioned, there's probably 1,000 little moments that when things are going well, you will have accomplished little steps. Okay, I'm about to get my own checking account. I have my own money. My parents are saying I can spend it how I want to, but they're also saying if you incur consequences, we're not going to bail you out. Like with my parents, they told me, if you don't budget for your 3-in-1 or your 2-in-1 Pert Plus shampoo, you're SOL, pal. I mean, they didn't say that, but it was implied. So I had to make a budget, but I was 16 or however, 15 or something, or 7, I don't know how it was high school. And I had to think, okay, I can't spend all my cash because I need to have some cash on hand in case I need to buy my Pert Plus and my toothbrush and my toothpaste and that's what. By the way, I feel like back in the day, we never bought new toothbrushes. I feel like I had one toothbrush for like 5 years of my childhood until it was just like this frayed mush. And I feel like today I get a new, I have one of those electric ones and I changed it. In fact, for those people who watch Gino and Jasmine, I have the exact same pink. I bought a pink one and, I was like, I had a choice of color. I was like, I'll get the pink one because it's like Gino's gift to Jasmine. Anyway, so my point is that if you're anxious as a parent and all along the way you're worried about because I always talk about this, that when you pressure the kids, so for example, you're pressuring them to get a car and a license and drive themselves, you absolutely, if you're a loving, responsible parent, know that your child might have a car accident. They might be injured. They might injure someone else. That's a risk. But you do what you can. You train them, you talk with them about safety, you have them take classes, you remind them, hey, make sure you're driving safe. If there's other kids in the car, make sure that you're paying attention to the road, you guide or whatever. But if you're anxious, you might go, well, we're not ready for that yet. So I'm going to avoid that milestone, pushing that. Well, one, you're just kicking that can down the road. You don't have to do it at 16, but you're going to have to do it eventually, probably. And if you do that at every step of the way, then you have like so many steps and milestones that you have to accomplish at the age of 26 that it'll be 35 by the time they're able to move out on their own. You know what I'm saying? So you have to be mindful of your own overprotective anxiety all along the way. Because I would be talking with a lot of parents in this situation, and they would have a 10-year-old that would be very immature and that would not have competence and would be very clingy to their parents. And I would tell them the problems right now are not severe because a 10-year-old isn't really required to be very competent and independent. And even when they're 15, you probably won't see a problem. But when they're 20, when they're 25, you'll start noticing it. You'll notice, oh, I haven't been doing this whole aspect of parenting the whole time. And at 10, there wasn't a noticeable difference, because when you're 10, you're pretty dependent regardless of how internally independent you are. You know what I'm saying? So anyway, so overprotective parents, anxious parents, enmeshed parents, codependent parents. The codependency, I frame it as a personality disorder, a characterological disorder, where the individual was forced as a child to take care of someone else's problem, and their whole self-worth and anxiety is oriented towards always outward and taking care of someone else's problems. So when you have kids, you can be codependent to your own children and even socialize your kids to become problematic so you can take care of them and keep them dependent. If you were traumatized by the child's early behavioral problems, this is actually an important one. So if your kid early in life has behavioral issues from ADHD, bipolar, trauma or something, and has a lot of problems in school, for example, then as a parent, you try to deal with it. You try, stay in school. Let's do everything normal. Come on, teachers, try. And then things just get horrible and horrible and horrible. And your kid is coming home crying every day or whatever. As a parent, that can be really hard, obviously. And you can, as a parent, be traumatized by that. And you remember what you did that was wrong. You kept pushing your kid, but then eventually you realized, my kid's different. I can't do that. And so some parents will completely pull back. And so by the time the kid is 18 years old, the parent is still in that mindset of like, don't pressure the kid, because I know what happened when the kid was 7 or 5 or 10. And when I was pressuring like a lot of really horrible things, or you pressure the kid, say you pressure the kid to get a license, and the kid gets in a horrific car accident and it's just luck of the draw or something like that. And it was very traumatic for you, obviously. And then the next time it comes that you're supposed to pressure your child to, develop another milestone passing, that trauma kicks in. Remember last time you did that, and you don't do anything. No, I can't do that right now. And you'll figure out some way of mental gymnastics and denial to say like, everything's fine. I don't need to do that. And so that's another cause of the parenting that can result in this kind of thing. You can be traumatized by an older child. So, and I would see this a lot, where you would have an older child in the family that would present a lot of problems. And then the younger child, it's like, well, I want to keep you innocent. Say the older child uses drugs and is sexually promiscuous and dropping out of school and and violent or something. And the next kid, you're just like, well, I need to coddle this kid and keep them from having freedoms, because I know what freedoms will result in because of their older brother or sister, that kind of thing. And people go too far with that. Another family system issue is when the system has a problem, like the parents have a lot of conflict. They sometimes will make one of the children become too dependent on them and lack independence, because the unconscious knowledge is that, well, if our kids become independent, then we have less to do as a parent, and thus we have to face each other, and we don't want to do that. So let's keep our kid dependent, and thus we can be distracted by our kid, and we don't have to deal with each other. Another final thing is kind of what you were getting at, B, earlier, which is overcompensation from parents. So say some parents were very neglected as children and knew what lack of parenting attention felt like. It was very bad. So they overcompensate by being overprotective and over-attentive and over caring and protecting them from the ills of the world, but not actually helping them to develop that competence and confidence. Anyway, that's a long answer to your question. Jibri and Miona, number 7. Mimi says, Dr. Kirk, can you address whether or not it's passive-aggressive of the parents to say privately, I don't support a train wreck, and not mention this to Jibri, but bring up reasons for not attending the wedding, kicking him out, etc.? Curious if you think that's part of the family dynamic. I don't necessarily understand entirely what you're saying, Mimi, but I'll answer based on, I think the question is, are the parents being passive-aggressive by not attending the wedding? It's some hidden hostility. So So remember that when we talk about passive aggression, if we're going to use that accurately, a better phrase is hidden hostility, hidden attacks, hidden anger, and hostility. And so the question is, are the parents angry and hostile towards Jabri for some reason? And are they expressing that hostility and anger in a hidden, indirect way by saying, we're not going to come to the wedding? Because what they really want to do is directly attack him by saying something that they're angry about, but they don't feel like they can do that, so they go around the corner. It's possible. To me, the question, though, is I just don't understand why they don't support the wedding. Like, do they know something? I'm sure they know more about the situation than we do, but the way the show is edited, I have no idea why the parents don't support the wedding and won't go. I don't get it. So, yeah. Now, maybe the reasons above, because Jabri is another person that we could look at as a possible product of anxious, overprotective, enabling parenting. Who knows? The parents certainly seem to be not doing that now because they're starting to put the pressure on a little bit, and they're not, at least the mom isn't getting entangled in the over-functioning, under-functioning dynamic now, but I think that might vacillate over time. But is it a passive aggression? Yeah, I don't know. I would just love to talk to the parents, and because the mom's a therapist, and so I just have to figure she knows what she's doing, and so I'd have to really just be like, so what's going? Because the show's edited funny sometimes, so I'd really have to say, like, what's going on here? Because help me understand what's happening, and I'm guessing I would hear more detail, but I don't know. All right, y'all. End of another comments video in which I comment on your comments that were commenting about my comments, which sometimes were commenting about your comments, commenting about my comments. And everyone out there, please take care of yourself and take care of others, because we all deserve it. We really, really do.